Welcome to this deep dive tailored just for you. Today, we're digging into the surprising prehistory of hair metal, that iconic sound of the 80s.
hmm
You share this really fascinating collection of YouTube transcripts from Rock and Metal Invasion.
Yeah, Steve's channel, he does some deep dives.
He really does. And he meticulously explored Canadian, European, UK, and lesser-known American bands that were laying the groundwork for hair metal before it officially existed, roughly, 83 to 92?
Right, that's the generally accepted window.
So our mission here is basically to pull out the key insights, the most compelling bits from Steve's research, kind of give you a shortcut to understanding this whole musical evolution.
And what's really striking right off the bat from Steve's angle is he isn't trying to, retroactively slap the hair metal label on these guys.
No, exactly.
As Steve points out, the term just wasn't used back then. He's identifying artists and specific songs from before that 83-92 period that kind of have the sonic blueprint for what exploded later. It's about finding those foundational bits.
Spot on. Steve's main idea across these videos is that tons of bands before the recognized hair metal era had these sonic qualities that would fit perfectly and maybe even directly influence the scene that came later. Like Steve says, the hair metal tag wasn't around, but the musical DNA. That was definitely starting to emerge. It's less like a sudden big bang, more like, those slow geological shifts that eventually make a mountain range.
That's a good way to put it. And when Steve uncovers these links, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How musical genres aren't just born in a vacuum.
Never.
There are always these earlier experiments, bands kind of pushing boundaries, playing with sounds that later crystallize into something, new and big.
So we'll be focusing on the Canadian, European, UK, and those lesser-known American bands Steve spotlights.
Right.
We'll pinpoint specific songs, albums that, according to Steve, really show this proto-hair metal sound. Should be some real aha moments, connecting these early sounds to the later explosion. So where did Steve kick off his sonic archaeology?
Well, in one of the deep dives, he started by digging into the Canadian scene, so yeah, let's follow his lead there.
Okay, Canada it is, just like Steve did. First on his list, April Wine, 1979, I Like to Rock from Harder, Faster. Steve calls it a really fantastic song that fits the proto-hair metal mold. Now, 79, that's definitely pre-big hair. What about this track, in Steve's view, kind of foreshadows what's coming?
Well, the way Steve describes it, it just has that raw, energetic, hard rock sound, That became such a signature of hair metal. Think about the anthemic feel, those driving guitar riffs,
Yeah.
even without the later, visual stuff. The basic musical energy that defined a lot of hair metal is just undeniably there.
Okay. Next, Steve highlights Triumph. 1982 track, A World of Fantasy from Never Surrender. Stick said he really loved this one, called it a great song. Triumph was pretty big in Canada then, but how does this track, according to Steve, hint at hair metal's future?
Steve basically just flags it as a great song that fits the category. I mean, Triumph's sound was pretty diverse overall, but they definitely had those elements of melodic hard rock, powerful vocals, strong guitar work.
Key ingredients.
Exactly. Those were crucial for the hair metal recipe later on. So it's likely this track specifically showcases those proto-hair metal bits Steve's listening for.
Then we get to Aldo Nova, his 1982 hit Fantasy from the self-titled debut. Steve really zeroes in on the influential riff here
Yeah, he does.
and suggests the whole album has several tracks with that hair metal sensibility. Crucially, Steve thinks Nova was a significant influence on Jon Bon Jovi and the whole explosion that followed. That sounds like a really pivotal connection Steve's making.
Oh, absolutely. Steve makes a specific point about the fantasy riff being influential. And if you listen back to early Bon Jovi, you can definitely hear that melodic hard rock thing, a similar way of crafting catchy guitar lines.
Yeah, you can.
So Steve, drawing that direct line from Aldo Nova to someone as huge as Jon Bon Jovi, that's a really fascinating insight into the genre's lineage,
Steve also brings up Aldo Nova's song Subject from 83. Says it has early Bon Jovi vibes, too. Now, 83 is right on the cusp, isn't it, of what we think of as the hair metal era.
It is, yeah.
But it reinforces Steve's point that Nova's sound was totally in that emerging style.
Exactly. And, Steve points out something else interesting. Aldo Nova's debut album also had a cover of Hey Operator by Coney Hatch, another Canadian band.
Oh, okay.
And Steve suggests checking out Coney Hatch's 1982 original, too, for that same proto-hair metal feel. It really paints this picture of a whole community of musicians exploring similar sounds.
Steve also mentions Headpins, female-fronted hard rock band from Canada. Their 82 debut, Turn It Loud, featuring Don't It Make You Feel. He says it would fit right into the hair metal sound. It's interesting, like Steve notes, to see female artists contributing early on.
It really is. Hair metal, despite its later image often being very male-dominated, its roots were actually pretty diverse. Steve highlighting bands like Headpins shows that the core musical sound wasn't just a guy thing. Makes you wonder if more female-fronted bands could have broken through if things were slightly different.
Yeah, good point. Steve then talks about Lee Aaron, another Canadian woman. Her 1982 album, initially called The Lee Aaron Project, had the song Night Riders. Steve describes it as having a heavy 80s metal sound, but still commercial, melodic. He even points out that Rick Santers from the band Santers.
And Rick Emmett from Triumph.
Right, they had songwriting credits. Just underscores those connections Steve keeps finding.
That crossover in songwriting credits, it really emphasizes how interconnected that Canadian hard rock scene was then. As Steve shows us, different artists were contributing to this shared emerging sound, even if they were in, technically separate bands.
Steve also talks about the band Rabbit, their 81 album Rough and Ready. He suggests the song Tell Me What to Do. Mentions he almost picked Pushing On or Anytime, too, so the album had a few contenders. The interesting link here, Steve points out, is that Rabbit featured John Albani,
who later became Lee Aaron's guitarist.
Exactly. More of these fascinating connections. It's like a web.
These connections are key to understanding how the sound developed. As Steve's research highlights, it wasn't just isolated pockets. Musicians were moving between bands, collaborating, definitely influencing each other in this evolving scene.
Toronto, another Canadian band, gets a nod from Steve. Their 82 album Get It On Credit, song You Love to Love. Steve says it sounds a lot like Bryan Adams.
Interesting.
Which is interesting because Jim Vallance, who co-wrote a ton with Adams, has a credit on another track on the album, Don't Walk Away, but not on You Love to Love. Makes you think about those early Bryan Adams albums, right? And their potential leanings towards this proto-sound Steve's exploring.
It does. Bryan Adams' early stuff definitely had a raw, hard rock edge before he went more polished pop rock.
Yeah.
Steve drawing that parallel to Toronto suggests similar musical energies were buzzing around the Canadian scene. Makes you wonder if Valance's involvement in the bigger picture helped shape some of these early sounds.
Sheriff's 1982 self-titled album is also mentioned by Steve, particularly Keep Me Coming. Steve found it surprisingly heavy.
Oh, yeah.
And notes, some members later formed Alias, who had that big ballad hit later on. But it's the heavier tracks on the Sheriff album that Steve feels kind of foreshadowed hair metal's arrival.
It highlights something Steve's research often shows. Bands sometimes change their sound pretty drastically over time. Their earlier, heavier stuff can often be a precursor to later, more commercial, maybe less rock-oriented material. It's like seeing the raw potential before it gets refined.
The Hunt's 82 album Thrill of the Kill, opening track, Show the World. Another one Steve flags. He says if you told him this came out in 86 by a hair metal band, he'd totally believe it.
Wow.
That really emphasizes how fully formed that pre-hair metal sound could be sometimes, according to Steve.
That's a strong statement from Steve. It suggests that by 82, some bands had basically nailed the sonic template that would get huge just a few years later. Really underscores the idea that the genre wasn't invented overnight,
Then there's Reckless, 1981 self-titled album song Victim of Time. Steve mentions this one too. He kind of jokes about the album cover being a bit shocking, but says he likes the track itself. He also points out that when they released a second album in 84 with a male singer, their image looked much more like hair metal. Highlights that visual evolution that came along with the sound later.
The great reminder, something Steve often shows, while the core sound might have been there, the whole hair metal package, the look, the attitude, the presentation took a bit longer to really come together and become, widely recognized.
And of course, Canadian proto-hair metal. Gotta mention Loverboy.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Steve picks their 81 hit Turn Me Loose as a prime example, even though it was already a huge song back then. He also mentions The Kid Is Hot Tonight from the same time. Solidifies their place in this prehistory, according to his analysis.
Loverboy is a perfect example, just like Steve highlights. A band that hit big mainstream success with a sound that absolutely aligns with the melodic hard rock foundation of hair metal, even if they weren't called that in the early 80s. Their popularity probably helped pave the way for what came next.
Steve also mentions a few bands he doesn't actually have in his collection but wanted to flag. First, also known as Myofist with Thunder and Rock from 81, Moxie's 77-track Rock Baby.
Wow, 77.
Yeah. And Teasy's 79 song Heartless World, These are deeper cuts Steve feels show even earlier roots of the sound in Canada.
It demonstrates, like Steve's broader research keeps showing, that the ingredients were being mixed even in the late 70s. Bands like Moxie and Tease were laying some groundwork for what fully emerged in the early 80s, with the bands Steve has physical copies of and talks about more.
And finally, Steve touches on those compilations, Moose Molten Metal and Maple Metal from the mid-80s. Now, these came out during the hair metal era,
Right.
but they featured lesser-known Canadian bands, some of whom, according to Steve, had that earlier proto-sound but just didn't hit the big time. Kid Wicked, featuring a young Sebastian Bach, is a notable one, Steve points out. Kind of brings Steve's narrative full circle, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows that even as hair metal was exploding, there was still this vibrant undercurrent of bands in Canada, some with roots in this pre-83 era Steve's been detailing, who were trying to break through. And yeah, the Sebastian Bach inclusion is a fun bit of foreshadowing of hair metal's future stars, just like Steve notes.
So Canada was clearly fertile ground for this emerging sound, Steve documented. Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic, just like Steve did in another deep dive, explore the European scene he uncovered. First up, the German giants, Scorpions. Their 1982 song No One Like You from Blackout.
Classic.
Steve sees this platinum album as the start of their hair metal sound, emphasizes the really good commercial melodic hard rock.
What's interesting there, as Steve highlights, is that a band as established as the Scorpions were also evolving their sound in a direction that lined up with this pre-hair metal thing.
Right.
Blackout definitely has a more commercial, melodic edge than some of their earlier stuff, yeah.
Totally.
And No One Like You is just a prime example of that shift Steve identifies.
Next, Steve discusses Vandenberg. The 82-track Burning Heart from their self-titled debut, Steve considers this textbook proto-hair metal.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Adrian Vandenberg later joins Whitesnake, re-records the track multiple times. That staying power, as Steve's mentions suggest, really says something about the song's core appeal.
It does. The fact Adrian Vandenberg kept revisiting Burning Heart underscores its quality and its clear connection, in Steve's opinion, to that powerful, melodic hard rock sound that was picking up steam. Steve immediately tagging this as proto-hair metal just highlights how strongly it fits that emerging style.
The Swiss band Crocus, their 82 song Playing the Outlaw from One Vice at a Time, is next on Steve's European list, despite, always being compared to AC/DC.
Right, always.
Steve thinks Crocus should have been bigger and that this album has strong proto-hair metal elements. He even mentions another track, Long Stick Goes Boom, as maybe another contender, showing the album's overall vibe in Steve's view.
Steve's point about the AC/DC comparisons is interesting because, yeah, Crocus definitely had that hard rock edge, but albums like One Vice at a Time, as Steve argues, also brought in a more melodic sensibility that kind of leaned towards what hair metal became known for. The fact Steve found it hard to pick just one song suggests the whole album had that consistent proto-hair metal flavor in his analysis.
Tommy Nilsson's 1982 single Dark Angel. This one's a bit of an outlier in Steve's European look. Steve found the rest of Nilsson's album pretty pop-oriented.
Oh, okay.
But he thinks this specific track is very much a hard rock song that wouldn't have sounded out of place in the mid-80s hair metal scene, like a hidden hard rock gem in a pop landscape, according to Steve.
Exactly. It shows, like Steve often uncovers, that the elements of this emerging sound could pop up in unexpected places. And Steve crediting Nathan from Tokyo Vinyl for pointing this track out to him, it highlights that ongoing process of discovering these precursors and sharing them in the rock community.
Now for a band Steve flags as having significant influence, Hanoi Rocks, their 82-song Taxi Driver from Self-Destruction Blues.
Ah, Hanoi Rocks, yeah.
Steve emphasizes their sleazy, hard rock sound, their image, notes their huge influence on bands like Guns N' Roses, LA Guns. This feels like a very direct line Steve's drawing.
Absolutely. Hanoi Rocks are cited all the time as a key influence on the grittier, sleazier side of hair metal. Their raw, hard edge combined with catchy hooks, like Steve points out, directly foreshadowed bands like GNR. Steve picking Taxi Driver specifically highlights that raw energy and rebellious attitude that became a hallmark of that subgenre.
The EF Band's 82 song Love is a Game from Deep Cut. Interesting case in Steve's European overview, often linked to the new wave of British heavy metal, right?
Yeah, you hear that sometimes.
But Steve argues this Sweet 8 band had a proto-hair metal sound, maybe just with less polished production. Kind of shows the roar side of this emerging sound across Europe, according to Steve.
It does. The core elements, the energy, the melody were there, but maybe that big, glossy production that later became synonymous with hair metal hadn't quite become the standard for everyone yet. Steve acknowledging the production quality, but still recognizing the underlying proto-hair metal essence. It's an important distinction he often makes.
Picture a Dutch band get mentioned by Steve. Their 82 title track Diamond Dreamer from the album of the same name. Steve describes it as really great melodic metal that fits right into the hair metal mold. Seems like, as Steve's research indicates, mainland Europe was actively contributing to this evolution too.
It reinforces Steve's broader point. This wasn't just a North America and UK thing. Bands across Europe were tapping into similar sounds, creating this wider, more international prehistory for hair metal than you might initially think.
And finally, for Europe, Steve features Bullet, a German band, their 81 title track Execution from their debut. Steve describes their sound as a mix of heavy rock, hard rock, clear AC/DC influences. But he found it really appealing as a proto-hair metal example. Even with that AC/DC comparison, Steve clearly sees the connections.
That combination of hard rock with maybe a more melodic or slightly more glam-leaning, even if subtle, you could definitely hear that in some later hair metal bands. Steve's enjoyment of it, despite the AC/DC influence, suggests it had its own distinct proto-hair metal flavor that resonated with him.
So Europe, as Steve showed us, offered a really diverse range of bands contributing to this pre-hair metal sound. Okay, let's cross back over to the UK now, delve into Steve's findings there from another video, starting with a big one, Whitesnake. Their 1982 songs Here I Go Again and Crying in the Rain from Saints and Sinners, Steve points out, obviously these were later re-recorded, became massive hair metal hits in '87. Strongly suggests their inherent proto-hair metal DNA, right? Steve says he prefers the '87 versions, but acknowledges the '82 originals laid the crucial groundwork. It's like the blueprint for a smash hit was already there in Steve's analysis.
Exactly. These are maybe the most obvious examples Steve gives of songs that were undeniably proto-hair metal because they literally became iconic hair metal anthems. The core melodies, the song structures, they were clearly strong enough to be reimagined and amplified for that later era.
Slade's 1981 song Lock Up Your Daughters from Till Death Do Us Part. Next in Steve's UK look, Steve notes that hair metal bands like Britny Fox, Quiet Riot, they covered Slade, strongly implies their influence.
Definitely.
He considers this album Slade's heaviest, and this track a prime example of UK proto-hair metal. As Steve often points out, cover versions are a big indicator of influence.
They really are. Hair metal bands were always paying homage to their musical predecessors through covers. The fact that Slade was a band these later acts chose to cover strongly supports the connection Steve's highlighting. And his description of Till Death Do Us Part as their heaviest album, that further suggests a leaning towards a harder rock sound that would resonate with the emerging hair metal scene.
Mama's Boys, an Irish three-piece. Steve mentions their '82 song Needle in the Groove from Plug It In. It was also on Power and Passion as a re-recording.
Right.
Steve considers this his personal favorite Mama's Boys song, feels it fits right into the proto-hair metal category. Interesting to see bands from just outside the UK, Ireland in this case, also contributing to the sound Steve's tracing.
It is. Musical influence rarely respects strict borders, you know. That cross-pollination of ideas happened all through the British Isles. And Steve's personal preference for the track just underscores its strong alignment, in his view, with that developing proto-hair metal vibe.
Girls' 1980 song My Number from Sheer Greed. This is a key one in Steve's UK findings. Features Phil Lewis,
Later of L.A. Guns.
And Phil Collen.
Later of Def Leppard.
Right. Steve argues this album and track perfectly epitomized that sleazy hard rock sound that predated hair metal. And as Steve notes, LA Guns also covered Hollywood Tees from this album. Lillian Axe later covered My Number. Really solidifies Girls' influence in Steve's analysis. This band, according to Steve, seems like a direct ancestor to a big chunk of the sleazy hair metal sound.
Absolutely. I mean, with band members who'd go on to be central figures in the hair metal scene, and their sound being such a clear precursor to the sleazier subgenre, Girl represents a crucial link in this evolutionary chain Steve's mapping out. And the multiple covers by later bands, like Steve highlights, just further solidify their influential status.
Tigers of Pantang's '82 cover of Love Potion No. 9 from The Cage. Another interesting inclusion in Steve's UK exploration, often associated with the new wave of British heavy metal, right?
Yeah, NWO BHM.
But Steve points out their hard rock version of this older song aligns with the cover song trend that became big in hair metal. And guitarist John Sykes, though not officially on the album, is in the music video for this track. Adds another layer of connection Steve often looks for.
Steve makes a good point about the cover trend. Hair metal bands did frequently put their own hard-rocking spin on older tracks. Tigers of Pantang taking a classic like Love Potion No. 9 and giving it a harder edge shows a similar musical instinct. And yeah, the John Sykes connection, as Steve notes, is an added point of interest for anyone familiar with later hair metal guitar work.
Gary Moore's 82 song, Don't Take Me for a Loser, from Corridors of Power. Steed gives this a nod for its prominent guitar work, melodic, hard rock sound. He suggests this track could easily have been a hair metal hit if it came out a few years later. That emphasis on guitar virtuosity was definitely a big part of hair metal.
Oh, it was huge. The Guitar Hero was central to the hair metal landscape. Gary Moore's blend of technical skill and melodic sensibility in this track, as Steve identifies, definitely lines up with that crucial aspect of the genre. Steve feeling could have been a hit just underscores its potential commercial appeal within that style.
Saxon's 1980 song, Susie Hold On, from Wheels of Steel. Another NWO BHM band Steve includes in his UK overview. He considers this commercial hard rock track to have had potential as a hair metal hit. They even re-recorded it for the US version of their '83 album Power and the Glory. Suggests they recognized its broader appeal, a point Steve often makes about bands kind of straddling these eras.
The fact Saxon revisited that track for the US release in '83 strongly suggests, like Steve implies, they knew it had potential to connect with a wider audience, possibly including those who'd soon embrace hair metal. It kind of acts as a bridge between the NWO BHM sound and the more commercially minded goals of hair metal.
Naturally, Def Leppard, their '81 song Let It Go from High and Dry, featured in Steve's UK exploration. Obviously, they went on to achieve massive hair metal success later.
Huge.
But Steve points to their earlier sound as prime proto-hair metal, highlighting this track as a strong example. Their whole evolution, as Steve often discusses, is like a perfect case study in this musical transition.
It really is. Def Leppard's early work, while maybe less polished and produced than their later mega hits, had that same underlying energy and melodic hard rock core Steve identifies. Let It Go really captures that raw energy that would later get refined and amplified in their full-on hair metal era.
Thin Lizzy's 1977 song Killer on the Loose. Steve mentions it's from the Lizzy Killers compilation, but also notes its original appearance on the Chinatown album in another video. He includes it as an undeniably influential track that fits the proto-hair metal sound. As Steve frequently emphasizes, Thin Lizzy's impact on hard rock and metal is just immense.
Lizzy's influence is vast, yeah.
Yeah.
And Steve, pinpointing Killer on the Loose, suggests that even earlier on, they were incorporating elements, the twin guitar harmonies, the melodic vocals within that hard rock framework that would later be totally embraced by hair metal bands.
Silverwing's song, That's Entertainment, from the '83 album Live and Kicking, but Steve notes the studio tracks were recorded between '80 and '82. Interestingly, as Steve notes, 3 of the 4 members went on to form Pet Hate, a band with a sleazy hard rock sound that directly predates the sleazy hair metal trend. According to Steve, this shows a very direct lineage to a specific subgenre.
It does. That clear connection between Silverwing and Pet Hate, as Steve uncovered, demonstrates how these proto-hair metal sounds were directly evolving into what would become a recognized part of the hair metal landscape, specifically that raw, sleazy, hard rock style.
Girl School song Don't Call It Love from Screaming Blue Murder also gets a mention from Steve, despite often being called the female Motorhead.
Right, you hear that a lot.
Steve sees this particular track as having a more commercial, melodic edge that would fit well in the hair metal era. Highlights, as Steve often points out, the broadening sound of even some heavier bands.
It shows that even bands with a heavier, more aggressive foundation, like Girl School, were exploring more commercial and melodic paths that lined up with the direction hair metal was taking. Steve noting the improved production quality on that album probably also helped create that more hair metal adjacent sound he identifies.
Budgie's song Truth Drug from their '82 album, another band often linked to NWBHM that Steve includes as a strong proto-hair metal example. Again, as Steve's choices illustrate, the lines between these scenes were often pretty blurry.
Exactly. As Steve's research consistently shows, there was a definite overlap and cross-influence between the NWO-BHM movement and the emerging sounds that would coalesce into hair metal. Steve's inclusion of Budgie just further highlights that shared hard rock foundation.
And finally, for the UK, Steve highlights several songs written by Russ Ballard and covered by UK bands.
Ah, Russ Ballard, okay.
Barnett Dogs Feels Like the Real Thing from 1980. A to Z's cover of I'm the One Who Loves You, circa '80-'81, Chevy's Just Another Day, an '81 single, and Samson featuring Bruce Dickinson, covering Riding with the Angels in '81.
Wow, Dickinson-era Samson covering Ballard.
Yeah. Steve smartly compares Ballard to a pre-hair metal Desmond Child, noting how popular his songs were within the NWO-BHM scene. That's a fascinating insight into the songwriting influences at play, according to Steve.
It really is.
Yeah.
Russ Ballard seems to have been this pivotal figure, crafting catchy hard rock tunes that resonated with musicians of that era, effectively bridging the gap between earlier hard rock and the more melodic, commercially minded sound that would define hair metal. Steve's comparison to Desmond Child is particularly insightful, yeah.
The UK scene, as Steve thoroughly showed us, was incredibly fertile ground for the sounds that would eventually blossom into hair metal. Okay, final stop on our pre-Histool tour, guided by Steve's research. The lesser-known American bands he featured. First up, Touch. 1980 song Don't You Know What Love Is from their debut self-titled album?
Touch, okay.
Steve considers this a really great hard rock song, a definite standout. He also notes Mark Mangold, the main guy behind Touch, later formed Drive, she said. And that Touch even appeared on a 1980 Monsters of Rock compilation with this very song. Sounds like they were on the verge of something bigger, in Steve's view.
They certainly did. Steve's enthusiasm for the track, plus them being part of the early Monsters of Rock, shows they were definitely operating in that hard rock arena. And the later success of Mark Mangold with Drive, she said, who had a similar melodic hard rock sound, just reinforces that proto-hair metal vibe Steve identifies.
Balance's 1982 title track, In for the Count, from the album of the same name. Next in Steve's American overview, features Bob Kulick on guitar.
Bob Kulick, great guitarist.
And this band, Steve points out, has an interesting connection to Michael Bolton.
Really? Michael Bolton?
Yeah. Bolton's brother Bruce played with Kulick and later on Bolton's solo album. Other Bounce members also contributed to Bolton's '85 release. It's intriguing, as Steve often uncovers, seeing these unexpected links between hard rock and the more pop rock side of things.
It is. The music industry is often way more interconnected than we realize. These links Steve highlights between Balance and Michael Bolton, who also kind of navigated both rock and pop worlds, really illustrate the fluidity of the musical landscape then. And Steve focusing on Bob Kulick, a respected rock guitarist, underscores the track's hard rock credentials too.
Rex, featuring Rex Smith. Their 1976 song, 10 Seconds of Love, from their self-titled album. This is a pretty surprising inclusion in Steve's American Deep Dive.
1976. Wow.
Yeah. Steve found this track surprisingly heady for its time, remarkably ahead of the curve. Fits the hair metal sound, Steve thinks, despite Rex Smith later becoming known as a host on Solid Gold and for musical theater. Really shows, as Steve often demonstrates, that the first seeds of a genre can be planted in unexpectedly early soil.
It certainly does. 76 is really early in the timeline we're looking at. Steve's own surprise at its headiness for the era and its alignment with the hair metal sound, despite Rex Smith's later career. That truly emphasizes his main point about these often overlooked early precursors.
Desmond Child and Rouge's 1979 song, My Heart's on Fire, from Runnin' Wild. Another fascinating example Steve brings up.
Desmond Child, okay. Before the big hits.
Exactly. Even in his early work with this female-fronted group, Steve can hear the beginnings of Child's signature knack for blending pop, R&B, hard rock. That skill that later made him a mega successful songwriter for tons of hair metal bands. It's like witnessing the early stages of a true hair metal songwriting master, according to Steve's analysis.
Exactly. Desmond Child's early explorations with Rouge clearly show his talent for crafting catchy, powerful songs drawing from different genres. Steve identifying these proto-hair metal elements even in this late 70s work really foreshadows his massive impact on the genre through the mid to late 80s.
Speedway's 1980 song, Rock Magic, from Speedway Boulevard, a pretty unique case in Steve's American Discoveries, studio-only project, features Dennis Feldman,
Who was later in Ballast.
right, and Jordan Rudess,
Who ended up in Dream Theater.
Yeah. Steve just calls this track a really good song. It's interesting, as Steve often uncovers, seeing musicians who'd later go in very different musical directions, collaborating on something with clear proto-hair metal elements.
It is. The fact that members who'd later get famous in bands with such distinct sounds balance with melodic rock, Dream Theater with prog metal came together for this project. It really underscores the diverse backgrounds and influences contributing to the early hard rock scene. Steve's positive reaction to the track speaks to its quality.
707's 1982 title track, Megaforce, from the album of the same name. This has a particularly interesting backstory Steve gets into.
Oh, yeah?
Co-written by Jonathan Cain.
Of Journey fame.
Right. This song is also known for being rewritten, different lyrics, as Calling to You on Ace Frehley's Comet album.
No way.
Yeah. Todd Howarth, who brought the song to Freely, was in 707. So was Kevin Chalfant, who briefly sang for Journey too. It really is a small world in the music industry, like Steve frequently observes.
It truly is. That example, highlighted by Steve, perfectly shows how songs and musical ideas could circulate and get reinterpreted within the rock community. The Journey collection, its later life as an Ace Frehley track with different lyrics, really demonstrates the fascinating journey a single piece of music can take.
Starr's 1978 song So Young, So Bad from Coliseum Rock, their second and final album from that year. This one holds a special place for Steve. He notes the band Mayday also covered this track. The album itself featured Bobby Massano, who became a prolific session guy later,
Right.
and Orville Davis, formerly of Rex. More of these fascinating connections and endorsements from other musicians Steve often digs up.
Steve's enthusiasm for Stars, and the fact another band, Mayday, covered their song. That clearly speaks to their quality and resonance within the broader hard rock scene. And the involvement of musicians like Bobby Massano, as Steve points out, further underscores their connection to the wider musical landscape of the time.
Frankie and the Knockouts, their 82 song Keep On Fighting from Below the Belt. A New Jersey band whose sound, according to Steve, sounded a lot like early Bon Jovi.
Ooh, early Bon Jovi comparison. Interesting.
Yeah. And interestingly, Frankie Prezite later got famous writing iconic songs for the Dirty Dancing soundtrack.
Get out of here. I've had the time of my life.
And Hungry Eyes, yeah. The band even featured Bobby Massano on their next album and Tico Torres from Bon Jovi on their third. That early Bon Jovi comparison in Steve's analysis is particularly significant.
It really is. Steve drawing that direct parallel to early Bon Jovi is insightful, given Bon Jovi's pivotal role in the hair metal explosion. Frankie and the Knockouts seem to have been operating in a similar sonic space, and the later involvement of musicians directly connected to Bon Jovi, as Steve noted, just strengthens that important link.
X's 1982 song Rock and Roll Party from Offering. Next in Steve's American Discoveries. Despite having a heavy metal image, their actual sound was more hard rock. This track got some success. Sadly, as Steve mentions, the band faced tragedy when their guitarist, Michael Osborne, died in a car accident in '84, effectively stopped their momentum, though they've had a partial reunion since. Just a poignant reminder of how fragile bands and careers can be.
It does. X's blend of a heavier look with a more straightforward hard rock sound reflects those evolving aesthetics at the time, and the tragic circumstances Steve recounts.
Yeah, it underscores the often unpredictable realities of the music industry.
And finally, Steve highlights Talus, their '82 title track, Sink Your Teeth Into That.
Ah, Talus, Billy Sheehan.
Exactly. Best known for featuring the incredible bassist Billy Sheehan, who later joined David Lee Roth, Mr. Big. Steve considers this album solid. The band even released a third album, like 40 years later, showcasing their legacy. Billy Sheehan's presence alone, as Steve often emphasizes, makes this band noteworthy in any discussion of hard rock's evolution. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Billy Sheehan is just so respected and influential in the rock world. His involvement with Talus, their strong sound, as highlighted by Steve, further solidifies the album's important place in this discussion of proto-hair metal. And the fact they resurfaced decades later really speaks to the lasting quality of their music and Sheehan's enduring talent.
So, as Steve from Rock and Metal Invasion has expertly guided us through his extensive research, the foundational seeds of hair metal were undeniably sown much earlier than many might initially believe.
Yeah, way earlier.
From the energetic rockers of Canada, the diverse metalheads of Europe, to the hard-hitting bands of the UK and those often overlooked American acts. A wide array of artists were actively crafting the sounds and even some of the visual elements that would later define a true cultural phenomenon.
And what's particularly striking, as Steve's deep dives consistently reveal, is that many of these incredibly influential pre-hair metal bands didn't necessarily hit massive mainstream success. When hair metal finally took off and dominated the airwaves, it really makes you ponder the significant role that timing, image, and maybe just a bit of plain luck play in the notoriously unpredictable music industry.
Totally. Consider this, Steve often prompts his viewers, can you clearly hear echoes of Bon Jovi and early Aldo Nova? Or maybe the raw, untamed energy of Mötley Crüe resonating in Hanoi Rocks? Did Whitesnake's original versions of Here I Go Again and Crying in the Rain just need that polished 80s production magic to become the anthems we remember? And maybe most intriguingly, how many other unsung heroes of this fascinating proto-hair metal era are still waiting to be rediscovered and given their due?
That definitely raises an important question one Steve's work kind of implicitly explores, about how we ultimately define musical genres, how we measure success in music. Many of these bands, as Steve's research shows, were clearly laying crucial groundwork, possessed the core sonic ingredients. Yet for a whole bunch of complex reasons, they just didn't reach the same stratospheric fame as the bands that followed right in their amplified footsteps.
This deep dive into Steve's insightful explorations offers just a glimpse, really, into this surprisingly rich prehistory of hair metal. We absolutely encourage you to seek out the playlists Steve has meticulously curated. You can find links in the descriptions of his Rock and Metal Invasion videos.
Yeah, definitely check those out.
And maybe even venture further into the discographies of these fascinating bands. What other connections, what influences can you detect? What other aha moments might you experience as you dig deeper?
And maybe consider this final thought, kind of building on Steve's extensive work. If some of these pioneering bands had emerged just a few short years later, right as the hair metal explosion was hitting its peak, how might their individual stories have unfolded differently? What kind of impact might they have had on the genre itself as it was taking the world by storm?
This exploration, inspired by Steve's dedication to uncovering these musical origins, serves as a powerful reminder that musical genres are rarely born overnight in some flash of inspiration. Instead, they gradually evolve, they selectively borrow, they creatively build upon the foundations laid by those who came before. The true story of hair metal's origins, as Stev so brilliantly illustrates, is far more nuanced, layered, and ultimately surprising than the often stereotyped images of big hair and power ballads might ever suggest. Until our next deep dive, keep those sonic explorations going, and maybe check out Rock and Metal Invasion for even more fascinating insights from Steve.